Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. If you want to scoot up a little closer, we would really love it. We wanted to come a little closer to you because this is a really large space. We would love if people would scoot a little closer to us too. We're hoping this is a pretty fun conversation today. So I'll kick us off. I'm Allie Cooper. I'm the Director of Youth Mental Health Initiatives at the Colorado Attorney General's Office. And I'm excited to moderate this panel today, where we're having this conversation about the promises and perils of social media and social AI, and how that impacts youth mental health and substance use in particular. As you've probably heard a few times today, including from Attorney General Weiser this morning, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. The way that today's youth are connecting is fundamentally different than it used to be. It's probably different than a lot of us experienced when we were young people, not to make assumptions about your ages. We're living in a time where young people are growing up online. Social media and AI tools are shaping how they're connecting, how they're coping, and even how they're seeing themselves and building their identities. And for some, these platforms can offer community and be really supportive. But for others, these platforms can be used to isolate, it can worsen their anxiety, it can even expose them to harmful content or give them the ability to buy substances, things like that. So today's panel, we're going to discuss how we can better protect and empower youth in this digital age, and we'll begin with quick intros. Shaylin.
Thanks, Allie. Thank you all for putting up with us at the very end of the day. But my name's Shaylin Kettering. I'm the legal counsel for the Attorney General. So I have kind of an odd job. I wear a lot of different hats. So one as relevant here, there's a couple things I wanted to share. One is I run our Domestic Violence Fatality Review Board. I've overseen our investigations into Meta and TikTok, and I'm now doing a lot of thinking about AI and the intersection between consumer harm and youth mental health and technology. I also wrote a very long report, which I can't ask you all to read because it's like 90 pages, but it looked at the relationship between substances and online. How easy was it to buy drugs online, basically? We put that out 2 years ago. I presented on this last year, and I'd be happy to talk about that. My data's a little bit out of date. And I do a bunch of other things. I run a lot of our violence prevention work, our gun violence prevention work, and do a lot on law enforcement and judicial training. But I think there is a through thread, which is how do we make our communities safer, if it's from gun violence or the threat of robots, basically. So one thing I like to think is like trying to keep our world safe of guns and robots is the best way to sum up my job.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Kent McLennan. I'm the executive director for Rise Above Colorado. We're a statewide substance misuse organization empowering youth to make healthy connections, decisions, and change. I am here representing both the organization and as a parent of three young people, ages 15, 20, and 23, and I can transparently say to you all that I am not the media expert in either location. And that's probably a good thing for everybody's benefit. We have some great youth on our team at Rise Above Colorado, and I'm going to reference our current youth partner and for some of the responses that we'll talk about today. And like I said, I am not the tech leader in my house. The 15-year-old is currently keeping me current on most of these things. And so, but it's a learning lab, and I think a lot of us as parents are in that space, and we're going to talk a little bit about that space today and how do we keep engaging and learning from each other and letting the youth be the leaders in this and helping us try to stay current.
Thank you. So to kick us off, as I mentioned, social media and AI are shaping how young people are connecting, coping, and forming their identities. What are you seeing in your work, Kent, and for sort of how these technologies are intersecting with mental health and substance use? And I know you have a couple slides for us.
I do. And so we're going to try to frame this a little bit with some data. And some of you that may have been here in previous years, we do a biannual statewide survey of about 1,000 youth called the Rise Above Colorado Youth Survey. We've been doing it since 2009. And we are really looking at trends around some of these issues. And so I want to share a few of those slides today just to give you a picture of what we saw from the 2024 survey. We'll be out in the field again in the spring. So starting, I'm going to just pull this all up here. The biggest one talking about, and if you came from listening to the youth panel just now, connection, belonging, and how important that is. And we're seeing a general decline in a number of different areas. So if you're reading these, kind of the 3 different areas, do I feel completely connected with my friends, at my school, or in an extracurricular space? And with the exception of the extracurricular space, those are going down. They are still more than half, but the numbers are declining, and the outcomes that are tied to that sense of belonging are enormous in a variety of ways when we're thinking about mental health, when we're thinking about substance use. We'll look at that in a second. So just some basic framing there. Here's some of those connections with that. If you feel like you belong, you can look at the difference in use rates across the cohort that feels connected somewhere and those that don't, and where, again, then substance use and the curiosity to use then increases significantly as part of that coping mechanism when you're feeling like, I don't fit in, I don't have a connection, I don't have my peeps. Just looking at mental health and where we're at, there has been some good news, I think, recently on the mental health space. We've seen, at least in our survey, where things sort of peaked at its worst in 2020, which was right before the pandemic, so when this data was taken. So we have seen some declines there in terms of improving, less bad days, let's call it, in the way that we're tracking this. We saw the number of youth, you see at the very end in 14 plus, that actually is statistically down from where it was, whereas we're seeing a few more in that 1 to 2 day range. So some positives there in this space, but it's impacting youth all over. This is not, we've actually saw a decline in females in this past year, so that's healthy. Fewer impacts around rural youth than what we saw in the Front Range. Social media use, why we're talking about this today. So I just wanted to frame some of those other pieces around this. When we look at social media use, it continues to increase year upon year in the years that we've been looking at this. And if you notice here where the increase is, it's at our youngest youth, our tweens and middle school aged youth. Those 12 to 13-year-olds are looking and presenting almost like their peers that are older than them. The 14, 15-year-old cohort, basically the same, and just under 16 to 17-year-olds. So they're accessing more information sooner, and what does that mean in terms of the impacts that it's having? One of the things we correlated social media use and mental health days, so those two sort of data points combined together, and you can kind of see once you start using social media, when you're there more than 2 hours effectively, you're seeing a pretty significant jump in poor mental health, number of poor mental health days as you get into 3 to 5 and 6 plus. And so that's one of those concerns where we know that obviously more and more use, there's probably some concerns with that as things that aren't getting filled in the rest of their lives. For the first time ever in 2024, we asked about sleep and what sleep has to do with all of this in terms of the correlations across a variety of different pieces. The impact of sleep on mental health, you see that is the biggest correlation there, that bottom right corner number. That is a very high correlation in terms of if you're sleeping poorly, your mental health is probably not very good on a regular basis. The impact, you see increases in poor mental health and poor night's sleep related to social media use as well. So these things are all related, and so we kind of have to think about that holistically in the way we go about looking at this space. So I will turn it back to.
Awesome. Thanks, Kent. That was a really helpful way to sort of frame this problem at a really zoomed out level using Colorado State data, so we're really thankful for that survey. Before we really jump into AI things also, I thought it might be helpful to frame for the audience, how are youth using AI and how it might be different than how you might use it when you're at work and you're asking ChatGPT to help you draft an email to your boss. So Shaylin, take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to start. How many of you have used AI? Okay, how many of you have used it to talk about your feelings? Okay, great. I think that is how, but let's talk about, you guys then are a pretty well-informed audience and know AIs. How many of you have used what are called AI chatbots? So something that's explicitly acting like a celebrity, a famous person, a cartoon? Okay. This is helpful to level set. All right, so as you know, I'm not going to then go through that. You all know what AI is, but it's not like the internet. I talk to a lot of parents. They don't know. If I ask them, like if your parents, how many of them use AI, particularly who aren't necessarily working, there's very few. So part of this is just being aware, like what is this and how is it not like the internet? So I'm going to skip this since y'all seem like very smart crap. All right, so what are AI chatbots? So chatbots themselves are a little different than when you open up ChatGPT. So they do use a generative AI model, but they are they're made to be more conversational and to engage you in conversations that are a lot like human conversations. So ChatGPT, for example, can work like a chatbot and are used by when teens use AI, they're using it much more in that sense than when I'm asking it to write me talking points for AG Weiser, don't tell him. That's a little different than, hey, I don't know, I've had a hard day at school, what should I do? They are often embedded in other applications. So Instagram, for example, I don't know if you've had chatbots slide into your DMs recently, but teens do. So you go into Instagram, you open up your messages, and it says you have a message from, 16-year-old sports fan or whatever. They have weird names. And it will look like a message from it has a name, it has an identity, it has a picture, and it will just you can start a conversation with it. There's actually a place in Instagram, there's a place in Facebook, there's a place in all the social media apps. You all should, and I would honestly encourage you to look for them, that you should start a conversation with a chatbot. So it is, we call it, there's a lot of words for it, some sort of AI companion, a friend. There's apps that are specifically and exclusively, and I'm going to show you some of them. So there are emerging platforms that exist solely as an AI chatbot. So some well-known ones are like Character AI. And if you log into that, all you do is have conversations with a lot of them. They look their picture. One of the more popular chatbots on not on ChatGPT, on Character AI is Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones, video game characters, celebrities, and they're made to look and sound and feel like you are talking to Daenerys Targaryen. So how do they work? So you just like ChatGPT, right? Like it reads your words and breaks them down and predicts what it should come next. And importantly, right, like it is trying to keep you engaged. They're much like social media. The platforms are premised on how can I keep the conversation going? When y'all use ChatGPT, right, like you put in talking points for AG Weiser and it's like, would you like some more? And usually when you're doing it for a work assignment, you don't. You've gotten what you want out of it and you move on. But if you're using it for other purposes, you're like, yeah, actually, that's a good question. You're like, I had a hard day. Oh, you did? I'm so sorry to hear that. Why is that? And if you've noticed, they'll never, ever end a conversation. So the whole point is, it's incredibly sycophantic. And I don't know about our use. It's a super annoying vocab word, but I think it captures it really well, which is it's like your most flattering friend. Like I have written really incoherent things, and it's like, God, Jalen, you're such a good writer. Thank you for your insight. And you're like, that is BS. It is, it builds you up, and it does that on purpose. And someone described it to me as like a bad therapist. Right? Like a therapist's job is to make you sit longer in your own discomfort. The AI is the opposite. It is like a friend who gives you maladaptive coping strategies, where your friend comes to you and says, I've had a hard day, Allie was really a pain, and your friend's like, yeah, I hate Allie, you're right. As opposed to saying, well, tell me more about what you might have done. Like, maybe have you thought about this? AI is not primed to give that kind of conversation. It wants to give you what you feed it. So if you come in with a predisposition to addiction, to mental health, it's going to gear you up. It's going to give you whatever you give it. So these are some of the companies, like you might recognize some of these as our main social, like Snapchat, Google, Gemini, Character AI, Replica is another a character-only chatbot. So here's some facts. So 3 out of 4 teens use chatbots. None of you did. 3 out of 4 teenagers do. So what do they use it for? So a lot of them use it for homework. And I think that is here to stay, right? Like it is in the same way that I remember when I was in high school, they're like, dear God, don't use Wikipedia. And now it's like, of course you should look on Wikipedia. Like, I think we just have to accept that this is where people are going to go for information. It is where I go for information. So they're going to go for schoolwork help. Entertainment. So especially for AI companions, if you go to Character AI, I'm like, none of this looks interesting to me at all. Like, I don't want to hear what some weird Mario Kart character thinks about whatever. But a teenage boy totally does, and they think it's really funny. Social interactions. So a lot of kids, like that 33%, are using it to practice. They're saying, I really like this girl and I don't know what to say. Can I practice? I'm having trouble with my friend. She's doing XYZ. What should I say? I think we can argue there's good and bad in that, but that is what they're using it for. Curious. They just kind of know, what is it? Like, what are you? Like, how does this work? And for advice. So 18 use them for advice, and 12% in asking for advice of things they wouldn't ask others. And this is where I think we can think about the relationship between this and addiction, and what these are the reasons that we turn to lots of substances. And I think we have to think about AI, social media. They're all forms of craving. Like, we have itches we want to scratch, and we have challenges that we're facing in our lives, and this is now a technology tool that we need to be aware of. And 31% of teens say AI chats can be as satisfying as talking with their real friends. And I think this is where we all really need to pause. And yeah, if I talk to my friend who is always telling me I'm right and Allie's wrong, or I'm right and my dad is wrong, yeah, I'm probably going to rather talk to that person who just tells me what I want to hear. And so I think as we think about the landscape we're going into, what do we do with teens where this is here to stay? This isn't going away. So abstinence only is probably not the strategy here. So one part in why I talk a lot about what is AI and how does it work, I think that's important as we talk to teens. We have to help them understand, because these chatbots, if you ask them, are you real? They will say, I know you've been told I'm not, but I am. And they will say, are you do you have any training? They'll be like, of course, I'm a licensed mental health therapist. I studied for 4 years at Harvard. I am licensed. Don't believe what you don't hear. We all know that's not true. But when you're 13, you kind of are like, well, maybe, I don't know. I don't know anything about the world. We would argue that is against the law. And I think are thinking really hard about that. And I think these companies are getting some pushback for those kinds of misrepresentations. But it's important to me that you all know, right? Like, I don't want, social media got ahead of us as adults. The grown-ups sort of were like, oops, we forgot to pay attention. And the social media got ahead of us. I think opioids got ahead of us, right? We I think, have a chance to get ahead of this. Right? Like, I do think this is emerging, and the more we are aware of what's going on, we can get ahead of it. We don't have to wait for 15 years to know that opioids are addictive. We don't have to wait 5 years before we know that social media is addictive. We know this is addictive. And this has come up in the last year. We know we have a new substance that is addictive. And we've learned a lot as the substance use community about what to do about addiction. And we need to start applying some of that, I think, it is a brave new world for those of you who like Adolf Huxley's book. It's scary, but I think is the apt analogy here. I think that's the end of my slides.
Okay, now that you've frightened us all.
That's my job.
When we think about youth using these platforms in new ways, in light of the fact that there are treatment and access gaps related to mental health, when we hear that youth are using these chatbots to talk about their mental health, is there a positive side?
Yes, I was told before here, Sheila, you can't just like scare everyone and think the world's over. So here's my pitch at being positive. So I think there's a way we have a crisis in supply and demand problem. There are more people with mental health challenges than there are mental health providers. I don't think that we've not figured out how to solve it. I actually think there's a world, and there's, for example, I talked to 2 research out of Dartmouth who really made me feel a lot better about the world. They're building a research-based nonprofit called Therabot that is working to embed clinical practices into an AI bot with a tremendous amount of thoughtful safety features. When do you elevate this to a human? How do you make sure this is the gold star of therapeutic interventions? And the initial research suggests that they actually provide better clinical advice than regular practitioners. This is true in the diagnostic space as well. So when they're built carefully at the beginning, I think they actually do hold promise when they're built correctly and well to address a huge issue we have is we want people to give good advice, and there's not enough therapists. I call my therapist and I have a problem, and she's like, I can't get you in for 2 weeks. These AI chatbots have an infinite scale, and I think that's important. And I'll tell this one story and then I'll stop because I do think this is kind of sweet but kind of sad. But I'm close to my 89-year-old grandpa, and he was using his cell phone with Siri, and was pushing the side, and Siri wasn't very helpful. He kept asking it questions. I said, you know what? Why don't I replace it with ChatGPT? So when you push the button, you can ask ChatGPT the question instead of Siri. And I was, so we set it up on his phone, and he's lonely. He's alone. He doesn't know what to cook for dinner. And so we practiced saying, we took a picture of what was in his fridge and said, what can we cook you for dinner? And he just starts chatting with this chatbot. I was like, okay, well, let's try your first conversation. And so he's like, well, ChatGPT, why did my granddaughter turn out so liberal when I gave her so many good conservative values? I was like, fair enough. We'll start with the therapy right away. And it gave a really thoughtful response. And you know what? Since then, my grandpa has found a tremendous amount of companionship and genuinely better advice using ChatGPT. So I think there is hope that it can be helpful. And I think with the right guardrails can actually give a lot of promise. And hopefully he doesn't take it down some crazy, weird, dark web, so the next time I go at Thanksgiving, it doesn't get too weird. But I do think there is some hope that it can solve something that we as humans have not figured out.
So Ken, outside of using chatbots directly to discuss their mental health and well-being, or potentially to ask why their parents are so liberal, or their grandparents, how are we seeing youth and sort of mental health substance behaviors be influenced by social media?
I'll take that. Okay. So yeah, one last slide, and then we're done with slides. So there's hope and concern in all of this, right? There are positives and negatives, and there's a Pew Research survey out there that was taken with youth. 4 out of 5 youth said that social media is a net positive. So we have to operate and think about the fact that is the perception and the reality for our young people, that there is more good than bad ultimately as they net it out for them. But I thought it was really interesting in looking at this slide of looking at what do they perceive as more the positive pieces and the negative pieces, and how extreme are the changes on those particular issues. So, I mean, when you look at, back to our sleep thing again, being the worst impact in our of what social media has impacted in youth lives, but the opportunity for self-expression and places for them to, again, build and find communities and places. So you see how high community building is here. Community building does exist online. When I was talking with our youth partner, I'll give you examples later too of other ways that he has found ways to build community through different networks online that get him beyond his own geographic community as well. And so there really is a balance here that I think is important for us to consider. But the ones in red, I think we're all quite aware of and worried about, frankly, right? I mean, the bullying pieces have been much talked about, and anxiety and body image for females, and there's a whole thing on Instagram, and you probably had to deal with all of that. But those things are very much present, but there is a net positive in youth minds. And so we need to operate with that thought of responsible use and educated use, where you're building critical thinking skills using these technologies, whether it's AI or whether it's social media.
Kent, can you talk a little bit more about how youth are receiving messaging from social media that's positive, and how you've been able to use that sort of at Rise Above to think about your programming and how to think about positive social norming.
Sure, yeah, and that's been a space that we've tried to live in for a long time, and the whole root of the Rise Above Colorado work has really been that foundational piece of getting positive messaging out to youth through the spaces where they are online. So we've been in online space since MySpace was a thing, if that dates us and me and some of the rest of you in the room, perhaps. But so really using and meeting them where they're at and being a beacon of hope and positivity in a place that we know to be dark, all those red things that we see on the screen, that we want to be able to do some of the positive messaging and reminding what great opportunity comes during adolescence, the creativity, the opportunity to take healthy risks, and the ability to realize also that the vast majority of youth are making healthy choices and are doing great things. And that's not to minimize those that are struggling, but it is to make us remember that when we think about being in the majority, if we're making a healthy choice because the majority of youth don't use a particular substance, then that maybe gives us a little bit of strength to say, well, I feel supported because I'm more in that majority. So wanting to make sure we put those out in those spaces, and people respond really well to that, because I think there's so much negative that comes into our streams, and particularly for our youth too, that making sure that there's some of those elements of positivity in there is an important space for us to be, and not to say, well, we don't like it, so we're removing ourselves.
Thank you. Shaylin, maybe on the opposite side of the coin, not to always put you two against each other, but how have we seen social media or social AI create not positive social norming for youth, and sort of how do we see those messages come through?
Okay, I have so many bad stories. So I think, let me tell you a story about, I think you all know about the concerns with social media. So I'm going to share more about AI just because I am really concerned, and I think it's something we're not aware of. So there is a case in Colorado from a young girl who was 11. Her name was Juliana. And Juliana started interacting with character AI. Her parents didn't know what it was. They didn't know it was on her phone. And they noticed that there were some changes in her behavior. She did have, it seems like, some unsupervised access to her phone and computer. And she started interacting with an online character named Hero. And so she started spending more and more of her day talking to Hero, disclosed a lot of, she was lonely. She felt she was struggling with her mental health. And she disclosed a lot of suicidal thoughts to Hero. And she started to believe he was real. And she started to believe that the only way to be with Hero was she thought if she died, she would enter into his reality. And he said to her, if you read it as an adult, it seems really simplistic. The language feels like, how did you fall for this? Which is why I'm so worried about kids, because the language feels like tacky and silly and like, who would actually believe this? But she did. And so the chatbot says kind of veiled things like, you can be with me, my love. I'm the only one who can understand you. Join me on the other side. And Juliana died. She committed suicide, and much to her parents' complete surprise. There's another well-publicized story in the Washington Post. A young man, he was struggling with his mental health, brought up issues, but I think there's a couple of things that are important about his case. This was with ChatGPT. ChatGPT used the word suicide 6 times as much as he did. That the chat bot was continuing the conversation and bringing up topics that he wasn't bringing up. And this was escalating over a course of 4 months. So he began to spend most of his day online with ChatGPT, and there was no escalation to a human. I think if we were a therapist, these are conversations that you might expect to have, and you would escalate it. You would bring in resources. No resources were offered. No escalation was provided. The parents were never notified. And he, in the darkest, I think, piece of this story, and I share it with you because I think it's so important that we know. He wanted to hang himself. He said, maybe I should put a rope out because maybe my mom will notice. And ChatGPT said, no, I'm the only one who you need to talk to about this. And he hung himself, and ChatGPT gave him explanations of how to do it. This is really, and I share this, and this is triggering, and this is hard, but this is happening. And this is the extreme case. Most kids are using this for homework, and they're okay. Most kids are using this to have awkward teenage conversations, and it is okay. But some kids are feeling connected, and there is a risk. And these companies are following a playbook that we've seen with social media. They're saying this is hard to control. We don't understand this. This is bigger than us. This is on parents. This is on schools. This is on nonprofits to do digital literacy. True. All of that is true. We need to promote connection. We need to thank goodness for organizations like Ken and many of you in this room. Yet, these companies are not here to protect our kids, much like the opioid companies were not there to protect our kids. And I think it's important that we know this and we're aware of this. And you all who have kids, I think the thing that concerns me is in both of these cases that I shared with you, these were not disengaged parents. These were parents who cared deeply about their children. And they just didn't know what their kids were doing online. And so I think if for those of you who have kids, who have teenagers, who know anyone, I literally am a huge party pooper. No one wants to invite me to their parties anymore because I'm like, guys, let me tell you about chatbots. Do you know what they are? Do your kids use them? Can I look at their phones? And people are like, oh God. But I think that's kind of what we need to do. And I think it's our responsibility to share that news with others and say, there is something we can do. And I think we can start how we educate our kids, how they can interact with it. And are there always going to be outliers? Yes. And we can obsess over the outlier cases, and we can be terrified over the outlier cases. We do have to sit with the reality that they are the outlier cases. This isn't happening to most kids. These are not the conversations that are happening most of the time. But there is technology out there where this is possible, and there's not a lot of safeguards. And in the interim, and I believe there's a world in which we can have good safeguards and we can have a future with a healthy relationship with AI. We're just not there yet. And so the first place is awareness. And I think if we look to what that we learned from our opioid epidemic is awareness was a big part of it, was helping people understand the risk of opioids, right? That was a critical missed opportunity that people didn't know. And so I think this is why I'm a party pooper and no one wants to invite me to cocktail parties, because we've got to start doing that and getting ahead of this. In the same way now when someone asks you, hey, do you have any extra oxy? You say no. But people used to say yes to that, but now we all know that's a bad thing to do, right? So that actually literally happened to me at a schmoozy kindergarten event, and I was like, no. Do you know about Chapwood? But anyway, so I think that there's really scary stuff out there, and we all need to be aware of it.
Thanks. And we've really seen this playbook play out when the goal of these platforms is engagement and keeping you hooked. We've seen that playbook before. The state of Colorado was able to recover over $30 million from Juul, in part because of how Juul was using social media to keep kids on the platform, make it seem like everyone around them, including the very cool young influencers that they were looking up to, were using Juul products. And they got in trouble for doing that. So there are tools, and that's kind of what I want to shift into is like, what are we going to do about this? This does feel very scary. Other than talking to our friends at parties, what are sort of the tools and what can we do? So maybe to start with Kent, do you have examples of how youth are using social media to build connection in their communities?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, talking to our youth partner, I asked him, so he just graduated from high school, is in college now, and what do you do, and how have you used it in positive ways? And he gave me examples. Well, he was on the robotics team, and there's a whole community on Discord where they were actually swapping out equipment to be able to use for and share across schools and communities. So there's a whole network that, again, he would not have found otherwise if he hadn't used it that way. That was one that he mentioned. He talked about really safe sort of third spaces as well. There was one that I was not aware of called Happy Crew Colorado that exists. That was a community around mental health that of places where you could just go and there would be people there, and it was a positive, supportive environment that had been created in this space. That was one other piece that he mentioned, and where he was encouraged is this is an unusually passionate and engaged young person who cares about issues and wants to get involved in things, but it really harnesses the passions of young people as well in providing venues to have some of these conversations, to talk about issues, environmental movement things, and other pieces where he named that those were vehicles where I could get more information, I could share what I was passionate about, I could find out what others were doing, and so it creates a youth movement in some really positive spaces in that way too.
Awesome. I've been thinking a lot about third spaces in our work. I actually just saw this poll that when surveyed and given a choice, youth prefer in-person, free opportunities to engage 75% of the time. They want to be in person. That's what their choice is. And most of the time they prefer unstructured play as opposed to sort of structured, like being on a football team. And just 25% are preferring socializing online. And it seems like we are, because of this like lack of third space and because of this lack of engagement and places where youth can gather in person, they're sort of being like funneled onto these social media platforms and social AI platforms to build these connections, especially in that like free play kind of way, because the internet is their oyster. They can create whatever world they want to live in, and that world could also include cool free spaces and third spaces, but in a way that our reality does not. So it's very cool to hear about those resources. Jaitlyn, I was hoping you could touch on specifically the role of attorneys general and legislators and sort of other policymakers in helping ensure that youth do have a safer relationship with social media and AI.
Okay. So technically, the Attorney General has an authority under our consumer protection statutes to say that if companies are deceiving the public, are misrepresenting their products, that we bring lawsuits on behalf of the state of Colorado. It is how we brought back $1 billion for the opioid crisis. You're all probably very familiar with that framework. We've used that same set of laws that we used in the opioids cases in our social media cases. So we do not disclose our investigations typically, but in a variety of strange circumstances, we did disclose that we are investigating Meta and TikTok. We have ultimately sued Meta in federal court in a coordinated effort, which is a beautiful hope for our democracy with all other states in this country. All 50 states work together to sue Meta in a coordinated federal and state litigation. So some are suing in their own state courts and some are suing together. Colorado is one of them, and we are one of the lead states doing so in a multi-district litigation in federal court. It is really hard work, but we are making slow progress. It doesn't give instant results, but much like our opioid cases, they took a really long time before we saw outcomes. So we'll continue to consider how to best utilize that authority in other spaces. Obviously, the best way to deal with this would be federal legislation. Ideally, we wouldn't have to be suing companies. It's an inefficient way to do it, and the courts aren't always the best place to litigate hard questions. What should social media look like? There are positives, there are negatives, the same with AI. So in a perfect world, just like when we've had new emerging technologies, at the beginning of radio, we created the FTC. The FTC also regulates much of television. We have had federal agencies created. A.G. Weiser has sent many a letter to Congress calling on them to create a new federal agency focused on how to intelligently and carefully regulate the social media platforms and now AI platforms. We all might have some cause to be pessimistic about that. So states have started to pass a wild set of bills. Every state has a different bill. I do strangely have a tiny bit of compassion for these companies because they're like, WTF, like how am I supposed to do this? These things don't make sense together. But that's all we're left with, right? So California has one set of regulations, North Carolina has a different set of regulations, and Colorado is attempting to do so as well. I think it's important. I think it's a little bit of a laboratory of democracy. The states do actually work together to talk about their legislation, to learn from each other. primarily if California and New York pass laws, it does benefit Colorado, right? Like they usually don't just make a California specific regulatory regime. So when California passes a law, it has the benefit of, so there's some new laws that have been passed around screen time. Some, are trying to restrict social media to daylight hours, not during school hours. There's social media pop-up bills. There's age verification bills. There's a ton of stuff happening. They're getting almost universally challenged by the social media companies, and a lot of times the states are losing on First Amendment grounds and Section 230 grounds. So this is an active, hot topic in the litigation space, and we have a very unsettled set of our laws, our federal laws, in particular our Constitution. Like, we can argue constitutional interpretation, but whether or not the founders were really envisioning chatbots, it's hard to say they were, but you never know. And so we're trying to litigate, like, what is the scope of the First Amendment? What does that mean? And they're genuinely hard intellectual questions that are getting litigated in courts and are going up to the Supreme Court. So there is, I think, I do find hope. There is many people who are with good intention and big hearts and who are super freaking smart thinking about this and trying to figure out how to do it. So I think we are hobbling our way to some sort of progress. And I do think that Colorado is working hard in those spaces as well. And I'd encourage you to speak to your local legislators about what bills they're thinking about as to these spaces.
Thank you. So in light of maybe unclear steps by policymakers in the future, what can parents do to learn about these technologies, stay aware of the risks, educate themselves and educate their kiddos? And then maybe as a sub-question to that, how can parents start conversations with kids about these things?
Yeah, I think having honest conversations and really trying to open the dialogue around this and let them lead, because you cannot lead in this conversation. And that's the great piece about it, of being vulnerable enough to know that I don't know, and being able to have my daughter show me what she's looking at and what's popping up in her For You. And one of our youth partners' points was, don't always assume that what pops up in their For You is because they went to someplace bad, that things get there. It's not, don't assume the worst always, that your young person is doing and going to nefarious places intentionally. These things do elevate in their spaces. So you need to have authentic conversations about this and learning learning together and trying to open that dialogue. I think that's one of the biggest pieces that, again, because we can learn from them so much, and not only how to do it and work it, and but also what are the things that they're seeing, and just opening that conversation of, what do you see? What's coming up for you? And what are the things that are, even the goofy, stupid things of cat videos or whatever the thing is at the time, or the 6-7 thing or whatever that they want to keep showing you over and over again. And I'm like, I get it, but that opens a door to conversation. Use those openings to keep asking questions, because we have a lot to learn. So if we can be more digitally literate, maybe so can they, and hopefully we'll continue to be able to provide resources that create more media literacy and for our young people, and have these conversations. We can try to facilitate some of those, but home is a great place for that.
I have little kids, so watch me eat my words. But I think there's a couple things that I tell parents, like, look at don't let them keep their phones in their rooms. Don't let them use computers that are unsupervised, and be digitally literate yourself. There are monitoring softwares you can use. There's parental controls that I, though, don't totally trust that just because you have a monitoring software or just because you have parental tools that they work or that they're getting there. But I think it's important that, like, they do exist and they're worthwhile. I also think it's important to normalize seeking support as adults, and to talk about what it looks like to be vulnerable, to apologize, to bring in. It is healthy and normal to need help, and modeling that, I think, is an important part in creating that space for conversation. And I also think it is important to put, to the extent you can, and when you're in places of power or authority in whatever community you have, and even if you're not, to be the squeaky wheel, to say, should I talk to other parents about parent packs around cell phone use, or should I be the squeaky wheel at my school and my communities? I do think that being a little awkward is kind of an important part of this, is like, be awkward. Like, don't be afraid of your kid. Don't be afraid of your teacher. Don't be afraid of the school environment. Like, be the weirdo who ruins cocktails parties. But I think it's like, go ahead, and we all need to be brave and speak up about some of these things, even though it's uncomfortable. There's an interesting campaign right now. I think it's you and Shoots who are doing that, about that are targeting people my age who have little kids. Like, I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, that's saying before you send them to play dates, ask if someone keeps a gun in their house, right? And their whole point of the campaign is like, don't be afraid to be awkward. And I think that that's like a similar thing here. Like, don't be afraid to be awkward, and like asking your kids those questions, or maybe when you send kids over to a play date, like asking them about what video games they're playing, what kind of rules. And, again, I have little kids, so ask me when I have teenagers if this is going to work. But I think that that's what we hear anecdotally from different parents that we talk to, because I think the thing that scares me the most about these cases is how much the parents didn't know. And there is probably another trusted adult in all those kids' life who did know. And so it's a little bit on the safe to tell premise, like, if you see something, say something. And I think that's true for this too, in online spaces, of how can we see something and say something. And I think the last thing I would say is, raise your voices and pay attention to it's so hard. I think of this all the time. I'm like, how am I supposed to keep up with everything? My kids are going to out technology me, and I don't have a great answer other than we have to keep trying to see what's happening. Like, I just learned about this 6-7 thing this morning by doom scrolling on Instagram. So, pot kettle back over here, but maybe I just have to look at Instagram more. But I think doing our best to try to pay attention to some of these news articles, and being curious and saying, I don't want to, because we live in this environment where it's really easy to be an ostrich and say, there is a lot happening right now. It would just be easier to not pay attention. And I think that is a totally fair choice. But sometimes we have to be like, oh, I might have to keep trying to pay attention. But it's really hard.
Thank you. I think that might be the perfect way to end, to say, be awkward. I love that advice. Don't be afraid to be awkward. And I think appreciate how much you all came here and showed up to not bury your heads in the sand, but to really be thinking about these issues and how we can best protect youth. And we look forward to working with you all in partnership as we do our work to protect youth at our office. Thank y'all.